This is the Wiggleman, welcome to Loot Hoarder, and I've got a new microphone. Today we're going to be painting the Infernal Battlesuit bust from Loot Studios' July release, Damnation. So to start with this model I gave it a grey prime all over, and I proceeded to airbrush it all with Vallejo Air Black. I then proceed to highlight with my Liquitex Titanium White ink. This gives us that zenithal highlight with our shading already in with the black undercoat. I then proceed to spray the model with Liquitex's Muted Pink. Don't let the name fool you, it looks more like a deep scarlet, and this will give us a fantastic foundation on our red armour that we're going for. When that's dried, we then hit the bottom of the model where we've got our shadows with our AK Interactive's Streaking Grime effect. We're not actually going to be utilising it with the white spirits this time, we're just using it as a colour. Then we just give the model one more highlight of Vallejo Model Air Red, and then we seal the model with a matte varnish. Once the model's dried, we proceed to use our Liquitex red ink. It's a very pigment-rich, bright red, and we use that to just add one more layer of highlight on top of all of the armour. We're mainly aiming for areas around the musculature, raised areas. Fortunately with this model, a lot of it is basically armoured musculature, so we follow kind of along the where the muscles would be in the chest, along the biceps and along the shoulders. I'm not the world's biggest fitness freak, so unfortunately I don't know the names of any of them, but yeah, if you're familiar with painting skin, it's a very similar process here. Next, I proceed to fill in the runes on the chest with our titanium white ink. The titanium white ink's perfect for this because, again, it's a very rich pigment and it's an opaque colour as well, so one layer of it goes down pretty well. At this stage, I wasn't entirely sure what I was going to do with the chest. I just knew that I wanted something to make it stand out. The next step is to highlight all the trim on the armour with Balthazar Gold from Citadel. It's one of my personal favourite colours, and if we're going for kind of a Khorne/Doom colour scheme here, I'd be foolish not to be including the old Balthazar Gold. Moving on, we continue blocking out the colours on the model. Now we're going for the kind of skeleton flesh on the face. We carry on using our Vallejo light brown that we did on our previous project. And at this point I began to feel like the model was looking a bit like a mixture between Red Skull and Captain America. I carried on, realising what kind of a bizarre combination that would have been. course, we carry on blocking in the flesh around the eyelids and the eyes and the eyeballs, anything eye related really, just making sure that we're not touching onto any of our existing red paint job around the facial area. Next up, we're using our Iron Warriors base silver paint, and we use that all around some of the silvery fiddly bits around the model. There was 2 bits here that I wasn't consistent with. Name them down below in the comments if it triggers you. Now we're using Army Painter's Flesh Wash to colour in the skeleton-y bits. I don't really get along with Army Painter washes that well, and I don't think they did too much of a job here. While the wash dried, I decided to use that time to reinforce some of the highlights. When it was dry, I went over the skeleton-y bits with our AK Interactive Rust effects. And look at that, I even snuck some into the crevices around the face and the neck. We then break out the white spirits and we start to go over the face and the eyes just to bring out the light brown colour that we've got underneath. I then took one more brush load of Vallejo Light Brown, this is the Model Air version that we're using, and proceed to highlight around the cheeks and the eyelids on the model. Then once again, as per the previous project, we use Citadel's Screaming Skull to highlight the teeth just to make them pop out a little bit more. I painted the eyes a brass colour at this point. I wasn't quite sure what I was thinking, and you'll find out later I don't stick with that idea. But just remember, it's okay to second guess yourself in the middle of a project. After a good night's sleep, the next day I figured that the model, it was lacking a lot of variation in the colour. So I decided that I would then paint around the collar and the hands and the forearms of the Battlesuit. I still felt the highlights were lacking in something, so I decided to try something I've never tried before with this project. And again, it's always fun to experiment when you're making something for yourself. So I took my titanium white ink and began to edge highlight around the armour to try and make them pop a little more. My idea was to go over the edge highlights with a red ink, the same red ink that I'd used for the armour previously, but you'll find out later it doesn't really add anything to the model. In fact, looking back over this footage, I feel like it looked better with the white highlight as it was. Tell me what you think. I then went back and started colouring the eyes white again, using our titanium white ink. I was going for kind of a cat-like pupil effect, However, as soon as I'd painted in the black pupils, I realised it looked ridiculous, at least to myself. To try and save it, I went to glaze the eyes with green. Unfortunately, I hadn't given the titanium white enough time to dry, and it completely ruined the eyes. Instead of throwing out the model, I carried on. To give the eyes plenty of time to dry completely, I moved on to shading of the skin. Again, this is using the exact same method that I used previously. It's just going over it with AK Interactive's Rust Effects, and then picking that off with white spirits, and then highlighting with Vallejo light brown, same colour as the skin. I fill out those horrifically sad eyes that were staring into my soul with white once again, and carry on to the next part of the project. And that's washing the brass trim, try saying that, around the armour with Citadel's Agrax Earthshade. The idea here was that I wanted to dull down as much of the brass glossiness, metallic sheen as possible, and then I was going to highlight upwards. So I'd dull it down, highlight about halfway through with Balthazar Gold. Sorry, I've been playing a lot of Total War Warhammer. And then I would highlight that with Psychorax Bronze. Now that the skin's been dried, I also begin to highlight that. For the eyes, I decided just to settle with a traditional World Eater's green lens to really contrast with the red on the armour. And I also proceed to highlight, using Citadel Stormhost Silver, all of the silvery bits. Now that the Agrax Earthshade on the brass trim has had plenty of time to dry, I proceed to go back over that with Balthazar Gold once again. And then I do the highlight of Psychorax Bronze. Nearing completion of the project, I decide to do a pin wash of Agrax Earthshade just to give that little bit more depth around the model. Pin washing is a fantastic way to add depth onto your models. Space Marine painters are very familiar with this. It's just taking a very thin brush and you're having a little dab of wash on it and just letting it fill in the recesses of the model. Finally, I put a little bit more green onto the eye lens, and at this point I realised, hey ho, why don't we go for the chest piece as well? For the base, I felt like just a normal plinth wasn't enough. I've had a sprue of Citadel skulls sitting around my collection for years, so I attached a bunch of little tiny skulls onto the top of the plinth and gave it a black base coat. For the plinth, it was a simple process of just giving it a zenithal highlight with our titanium white. Love that stuff. And then once the white had dried, we go over it with a burnt umber ink. Finally, all we do is just give it a very quick dry brush using Citadel's Screaming Skull. And here's the final products. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment and subscribe, and let me know what you thought down below. Bye bye for now.